Welcome everyone to another episode of KQL Café. We're now in May 2026, just in case you watch the recording later. Your hosts, Gianni and myself. And the agenda, as always, a big warm welcome. Then we'll give you some updates, what's happening in KQL land. We then have our guest, Sergio. Sergio was here earlier, and if you follow the KQL community, you are hopefully well aware that Sergio is a big contributor with detections and ideas and how to solve problems using KQL. So really looking forward to his session today. And then we dive into a few topics about what Gianni and I have been doing with KQL in the last couple of weeks. So let's get started. First of all, in our own interest, we'd like to remind you that in October this year, to be precise, on October 30th, Friday, we're running another KustoCon conference. The conference is both online and hybrid. So if you want to come over and join in person, in the morning we have an exclusive workshop for those that are present on site. And if you cannot make it, consider registering anyway for the online sessions. Meanwhile, we also have almost all speakers confirmed, as well as their sessions. So go to KustoCon.com, take a look, and we will be very pleased to see you there. Next, another announcement, hot off the press. I just saw this coming across my LinkedIn feed a few minutes ago, but still thought it's worth mentioning. You probably all know Mehmet, the guy behind Blue Raven Academy, and he has just launched some new courses and is also offering a discount on 2 of the courses, as you can see here. So depending on where you are in your journey in learning KQL, I think we've mentioned it earlier, Blue Raven is definitely a good location to go and to start applying your KQL knowledge or increasing your knowledge on KQL.
Yeah, and he also has the free version if you want to start playing around a bit on his website.
Yeah.
You can ease into the program, and then it's a nice course to follow.
And what's especially cool, you can practice in a real environment, meaning that you're going to use Azure Data Explorer in there. You're going to load your exercises so you can really execute your queries and play around and enhance your KQL skills there. Next, we have an announcement from Microsoft regarding the Advanced Hunting portal. So for those working with Microsoft Defender, as you know, we're moving from the Microsoft Sentinel Azure portal towards the unified portal, and including me, sometimes people felt more, let's call it, comfortable in working in the Azure portal. But I must say, we now really have a big jump forward and a lot of nice improvements within the Advanced Hunting portal. I'm actually going to quickly share that portal with you. So just in case you haven't been there since a while, as you will notice, the UI has, I will not use the word dramatically, but drastically changed. It has, in my opinion, a way more cleaned up appearance. And we have a lot of new features. First of all, for those of you who have to deal with large data sets, this has always been, a little difference between running your queries in the Azure portal in log analytics versus in Defender. But now, as you can see, we now also have a 100,000 row limit, just in case you need that. I would say, still try to limit your query based on the information you really need by applying your KQL skills, because who on earth is going to sift through 100,000 records? But just in case. And you can now also create your custom limit. So this really might be interesting for those people that have to work in different environments where, based on the size of the logs that you have to deal with, because the defaults are, as you can see here, 1,000, 5,000, 10,000, and then 100,000. And of course, you can also use the take command in KQL and then say, just give me those. But that might then be random results. And you can now also specify, as you can see here, a custom limit. That's one thing that's interesting. Another thing that you will notice here is that we have, it's not here, it's here. We have some more visibility in what actually happens with the query. How long it took, its performance, some statistics, and also, very helpful, if you have any errors in your query. As you will see in the related blog post on the Microsoft Tech community, they're also providing now more insights into any errors that you might have in your queries. So hopefully that will help you address those. So switching back. So in short, we have a limitation increase. We can now configure the records through a picker. Partial results on size limit, UI improvements, as you could see, error handling. You can also rename tabs. So if you're one of those persons who used to have 100 browser windows open and 100 KQL hunting queries in your advanced hunting, and you have all these, by default, it calls it new query. You can now easily rename them as well there. Definitely. Oh, and last but not least, you can now also save your KQL queries there for functions like we used to do in the Log Analytics Azure Portal UI. So definitely give this a read. Next. Here is just a screenshot. That was just a fallback in case online wouldn't work. Next, we have a nice query that came across my LinkedIn feed, which I actually found interesting because, usually maybe in the early days, it was you as an admin in your Entra environment who will create app registrations, enterprise applications. But especially now with all those connected services, you will notice that, especially if you're, for example, dealing with AI, you get a whole bunch of service principals being created, sometimes by the backend service, and you might wonder, who did create this? So David shared a nice query. You'll find the query in the link below. That will give you some more visibility on, who or what did actually create a service principal. So if you're concerned about service principals and you want to observe or govern those in a better way, using now the Microsoft Frontier language, you definitely want to take a look at that query. Next, Microsoft made some changes to the Microsoft Entra ID improved readability for authentication methods and policy update audit logs. So in simple terms, if you are in Entra and you are changing authentication methods like, allowing MFA or disabling SMS, FIDO, QR code, and whatsoever, Microsoft now made some improvements, so it's easier to understand what did actually change. Because previously, in those logs, they would basically dump the whole policy again with all the settings, and that made it a little bit difficult to understand. Well, what has changed now effectively in this policy. And as you can see, Gianni and I were playing last night a little bit, and I've made some policy changes in my tenant. And as you can see, we have now nicely, because what I did, for example, here in the what was it? The temporary access pass, sorry. I changed the validity of the duration, and instead of dumping the whole policy with all its values, we now clearly see that I've changed this from 480 minutes to 5760 minutes. Microsoft strongly recommends, as they write also in their message center announcement, or you can go to Merrill's tracking website. And of course, you might want to update any detection or monitoring queries that you have in place for those. Because obviously the whole parsing of those of the data is now being changed. Yeah. Next, another important one you might want to look at. Microsoft also, through Message Center, announced a planned breaking change to the ASIM KQL functions used by Microsoft Sentinel. So more specifically, this is about the ImProcessCreate function, where previously you had the parameter called target username. And that parameter is still around. So if you look into the GitHub diff, you will notice that Microsoft, in the first step, basically now added the target username _has parameter. And you are encouraged to update your queries, that use this, as at some point Microsoft is most likely going to remove the target username as a parameter. You can see in your tenant whether you already received this new function by simply going to your advanced hunting UI, then select functions, and then select search for ImProcessCreate. And not to be confused, I simply added both commands for visibility here. And on the right side, when you actually say show the function, you will notice that somewhere here you now have this new target name has parameter. Exactly. So that's
good change. Because then you can do partial searches in your ASIM parsers instead of having to enter the full names.
Yeah. So that's the improvement here. Good. Next, a blog post from Benny. Benny, also very active in the KQL community in the last couple of, I would say 12 to 24 months. Nice use case for those of you who have to still look after Active Directory. PingCastle is one of the well-known frameworks that helps you to assess your Active Directory, similar to Semperis's tool, but PingCastle, I have to add here, if you use it for yourself in your organization, you're good to use it. If you use it as a consultant, you will need to have a license. At least that's my latest understanding. Nevertheless, what's cool is if you run PingCastle, it basically runs against your Active Directory. It runs a lot of checks, health checks, but also security-related checks. I would almost say, I hope that's a fair comparison, like Master, that we know from the community that runs against Entra. And what Benny did here basically is creating a CI pipeline where he's basically on an automated basis running the PingCastle checks and then generating an output, as you can see here in the steps, and then ingesting those outputs into a log analytics workspace to make reviewing the data more accessible by means of a workbook. So if you are using PingCastle, if you are working with log analytics, definitely give this a look. And of course, once you... Yeah, go ahead.
What's also fun to see in this setup is he used the Arc managed identity to authenticate against Entra. But you can also do, for instance, for your Logstash servers or your other servers where you need to have an identity to interact with Entra. For instance, Logstash uses it in combination with the permissions on Sentinel to write your data into it, so you don't have to set up secrets. And the same goes with this setup, where you install the Arc agents, you onboard Arc. Also bear in mind to secure it a bit, but by default you leave it open. And then you use the system assigned identity from the server to authenticate against Key Vault. and from there slowly go into the process without having to do secret changes every 30 days or whatsoever.
Yeah. No, really an elegant solution, and you find a well-documented step-by-step in both his blog post about this as well as in the GitHub repository that we've shared here below. Good. And with that, we're through the news from this month, and I would like to leave the stage to Sergio.
Super. Thanks a lot, Alex, Gianni. Hello, everyone. I'm going to share my screen. So let's go for the presentation. Super. Okay. Can you see my presentation now?
Perfect.
Super.
Yes.
So yeah, hello, everyone. I'm really happy to be here for my second time, my second KQL Café. And today I would like to show you different cases and scenarios where I'm using TI feeds. I think is one of the most common scenarios in threat hunting. Now we're using TI feeds to search for different indicators. So I will show you some cases that in my day-to-day are working really helpful to enrich what I'm looking for when I'm doing threat hunting. Quickly introduction about me. My name is Sergio Albea. I'm working as threat hunting expert in Switch. Switch is a Swiss foundation that is oriented to protect universities, research centers, really focus on education. And so we are managing the CH and LA domains. Regarding my hobbies, I love all things related with music, also with football. I'm looking forward for the World Cup in the coming weeks. I'm really excited about that. And then, I arrived to Switzerland around 7 years ago, but I love to share where I'm coming from. I'm coming from a small village close to Barcelona called Valls, which I encourage you to visit sometime if you have time. They have a really good traditions. So let's go to the topic, to the agenda. I think that will take less than 1 hour. So I think that I will be really focused on what I want to try to share with you. Quick introduction about some basics about the TI feeds. Then I will show you some models that help me a lot to have the quality and to enrich the TI feeds and the evaluation of the IOCs and the match ratio. Then I will show you a recent research that I did to build a TI feeds exporting all the IOCs from different security websites as cybersecurity news or reports. And in that way, I can have my TI feed based on the cyber security news and other articles, which help me a lot to quickly react in case that there is a new attack. I can quickly identify via threat hunting if I'm affected by these new possible actors. And finally, we'll show you quickly a small introduction about how I'm doing an integration with MISP via Logic App. And that's it. So let's start. TI feed basics. I'm sure that most of you are familiar, but I want to share that. We have different types of indicators, but the most common ones I would say that are indicator of compromise and indicator of attack. IOCs are basically when we know that an indicator, a signal, is something malicious in a nutshell. And if you see it in your logs, it's because could be that something is compromised. No, can be malicious URL, malicious domain, a malicious file based on the file hash. If you see an alert based on these indicators, it's really related to IOCs. On the other hand, we have the indicator of attack, which is more a focus on an attack that could be in progress in your system. For example, if you detect connections attempt to the port 3389, you know that can be RDP connections attempts. If you see a specific commands such as MSHTA, can be related to Luma Stellar, to ClickFix. So this is the kind of difference between these indicators. And as I said, we have other ones, indicators of fraud and other ones, but I want to be focused on these two. So to give you an example about these two indicators that I was talking about, we have a ClickFix case, as you see in the screen. And here we could take the IOA, which will be the command, the MSTA, or the IOC. The IOC will be the URL, okay? But as if you have been reading some of my articles, I'm not really a fan of IOCs, basically because they can be rotated easily. And a domain or an IP that was malicious yesterday can be rotating and can be already cleaned and can be a legitimate one. So I'm really in favor to go with indication of attack, because also if you work with detection rules, it's easier to maintain the detection rules if you are able to work with AOA. That's it about indicators. Let's move to the TI feeds. TI feeds at the end, to say it in a simple way, are kind of repositories where different contributors, vendors are adding different indicators. Can be indicators about network stuff such as IP address, can be based on files, about files that we know that are compromised or malicious, host, email bases, and even more, like register keys, FATs. So a lot of FAT locations, so a lot of different type of IOCs can be configured to be inside of different TI feeds, different repositories. So now that we have these basics, I would like to talk to you about some challenges that I have had with the TI feeds. One of them is that, unfortunately, nowadays, we have a lot of copy-paste, which means someone either in LinkedIn, in other resource, are promising you that they have the best TI feed, and they are just a copy of 2 or 3 trusted TI feeds. So that's one of the challenges, to really identify which are the TI feeds that are giving you new value. Then obsoletes. There are a lot of really good initiatives about new TI type of IOCs, TI feeds, sorry. But in the time, due to whatever, they are not updated anymore. Can be that the person is not working on that feed anymore, and then at the end you have a detection rule or a connection to something that is totally obsoleted. And as I said before, imagine that you have a TI feed with IPs and it's not updated. Could be that at the end you are matching a TI feed with IPs that are already sanitized. So it's also an important risk. Another challenge, and I suffered that. When I started to work with TI feeds, I was really excited to test multiple TI feeds and this stuff. And suddenly I found one and I connect one to my home that was adding a lot of IOCs, including, for example, WordPress or Yammer or Facebook.com as malicious instead of add the specific URL. No? Luckily, I was blocking the connections from these IOCs of this specific TIP, which I will not say the name, at home. So the only complaint was my wife not able to connect to Instagram. So I quite survived after 30 minutes. So this is important to identify TI feeds that are trusted. And if you want to use experimental ones, yes, you can audit. In that way, you can have, informational alerts or other type of notifications, but be careful if you don't have evaluate deeply any type of new TI feed. So based on this kind of challenge, I decided a month ago to create this model. I really love create models because it helped me to quickly apply my ideas when I have a new TI feed, for example. So the TIPset is basically evaluate which is the status of the feed and evaluate if they are giving me a new value or at the end is just repetitive content, as I said before. So let's go step by step in this pyramid. First of all, we have unique IOCs. And here you have a good example. If you see the KQL on top in orange, basically this KQL query is connecting different TI feeds. You see them in orange. And at the end, what I'm doing is I'm unifying all these TI feeds. And then I'm comparing with the decount, which is the IOCs that I have in the different TI feeds. And as you can see here in the results below, I can see that the SPI domain list is all the time in all the different type of IOCs. So what means That could be that this TI feed is just adding and connecting all these additional TI feeds that I have in the list. So perhaps I could use just this despite the domain list, or I prefer to go more in the independent with the other ones. No? But if at the end, if I connect both, I will have like duplicated alerts. So this is the first step of the TIPset. Then detect the IOCs. Also, I want to know if the TI feed that I'm using is useful for me, because it could be that it has IOCs more oriented to bank, pharmaceutical, education, whatever. But what I want to know if for me is having matches. No, at the end, the match ratio is something really important in the threat intelligence. And here, basically, what I'm doing, I will show you at the end of the presentation how I'm doing that. But for every case that I have a match between a TI feed and my tenants, I'm registering in MISP. In that way, then I can evaluate which are the TI feeds that are giving me more results, and also which is the possible damage that they can stop. So for this reason, I'm registering where is the delivery location of these different threats that are from this TI feed source. Then also it's important to know if the matches are malicious or not. So for this reason, in these logic apps, what I'm doing, I'm going to VirusTotal. And if you see here this B5, B4, B8, basically for every match that I have, like a URL in a TI feed is matching with some of my tenants, I send my URL, this URL that is matching to VirusTotal, and it tells me how many vendors in VirusTotal are tagging this IOC as malicious. It totally helps me to identify if are true or false positive. And also it's important, as you can see, the T location is telling me that the email with this malicious URL was delivered in the inbox, which I mean that I have to respond because the threat is active, and if the user click on that email, could be potentially accessing to this malicious URL or file. And the last part that I'm really happy about AI stuff, because before I was doing this manually, is about identify if the TI feeds and the IOCs are still active or not. Before it was a challenge for me because I didn't have any way further than manually to visit the TI feed and see if it has new contributions. But now, happily, with all the AI stuff, it started to change a bit. So let me show you this example. This is a general TI feed, fish hand AO. You have multiple ones. This is a bit what it contains. But for me, what I really want to know if this IOCs, this TI feed, is still active or not. So I asked Claude, can you run every day, get me all these IOCs from these TI feeds and duplicate them in my GitHub for my own purpose? And which is my own purpose? Know if the IOCs are active or not. So what I'm doing is I have my repo, which is duplicated, and I know if the IOC is still active, and also I have a screenshot. So imagine in a scenario, I have an alert in Defender or in Sentinel, a user has clicked in a malicious URL, typical one, no? When the user was clicking in the URL, the IOC was still active or not? Is a big question. Because if it was still active, is when I have to revoke token, restart password, whatever. But could be that the user, when was clicking the URL, was already offline. So with that kind of enrichment that I'm having now with Claude, I'm able to know when the URL was off, was down, and also I don't need to go to any run in my isolated virtual machine to verify the URL and see what is behind. Because Claude is doing this for me, and I have a screenshot of all the URLs. So I have my malicious URL ticket in Defender or Sentinel. I take the URL, I come to my repo, and I quickly know what is behind. Easy. I can speed up, and I can prioritize all type of incidents for criticals. So this will be the first model. And then let's go deeper about the IOCs. We have evaluated TI feeds. And the second model is more based on the content, the indicators. So what happened? When we are using TI feeds, it's really important to know the match ratio, because we can have thousands of IOCs, but we have to take in account, for example, that for Defender for TI indicator, we have a limitation of 15,000 entries per day, which I hope increase in the future. And we need to really classify which are important for us, because if at the end we have to be focused on just 50,000 IOCs, if at the end we are not adding what is important for our sector or customers, we are losing a lot of threat intelligence data. No? So this match for model, it verifies the quality of the IOCs based on different 4 factors. First of all is the language. If I'm based in Switzerland, the IOCs that are containing URLs, as you see, IOC value, are written in Spanish, the match ratio that user is clicking on a Spanish URL is really low. If it was in German or French, would be totally higher. Second aspect that this model is evaluating, the location. If the IOC value is, it has something like Medellin, Barcelona, instead of Zurich, Lausanne, Geneva, also the match ratio will be lower than if it has Swiss cities or keywords. Then the systems. If my company is using just Mac devices, the IOCs that contains Windows updates, Microsoft Office, and imagine that I'm using another email solution, also the match ratio will count as lower. And finally, the most important part is the sector. If at the end I'm using and I'm working in education, as I said before, having URLs that talk about banks, sports, also will be lower than if I have URLs that contains PhD, a studio opportunity, things like that. So these are the 4 aspects that the match for intelligence ratio model is evaluating. Luckily now, also with this AI stuff, I can do this evaluation automatically, because before I had to create a step in my logic apps saying if URL contains PhD, Zurich, Geneva, so it was really like manual, no? Like adding keywords and at the end an array, but was not really working as I would like, no? But it changed now with these AI agents, and basically here you see the case that I showed before, that I was enriching current TI feeds, and I'm saying to Claude, please also further than the screenshot and know if the IOC of the URL is online or offline, tell me which is the sector and tell me which is the language of the URL. That's for me perfect. Because if I have education as a sector and is written in German or in French, is an IOC that for me has a big value for me, because it's totally oriented to education plus to Switzerland. So this is what I have been working during the last year based on TI feeds to try to improve and be more focused on the IOCs and TI feeds that are totally oriented to my sector. But then I want to share something I'm really happy and looking forward to work more and update this content, which is basically a mess that for me is daily busy different websites, reports, chats, like, please, can you review these IOCs? Can you review this article about this new ransomware? It's really complicated to be able to gather all this information, add them in the corresponding TI indicators or any other type of controls to evaluate if these indicators are active or are observed in our tenants. So I went with Claude again. I say, can you every day go to cybersecurity news and ransomware.live, take all the IOCs and add them in a new repository? So it was what Claude did. And here you see the result. So basically, I don't have to do nothing, then enjoy the results. And here you have the connections from the different articles that are observed in these two sources, which the type of IOC you see in the left, in the first column, the value, and also it has more information, which I need more space in the PowerPoint. So it's not a piece, but basically is the time that the article was published and additional information. But at the end is what I want to transmit, the idea that you can build your own reports, own TI feeds based on other TI feeds and enriching based on what you need. It's amazing, the ideas and the options that we have now. So basically from this TI source that I'm creating with these two security places, security news and ransomware live, and creating a KQL query that for every type of IOC, as you see here, the case 0, case 1, case 1, case 2, 1, based on every type of IOC, I'm doing different KQL queries, looking for URLs, looking for emails, looking for domains, and others. You have the entire KQL in the link below because it's too big, but basically that's the idea, no? At the end, these are my trusted source about security stuff, and I want to extract all the IOCs because for me, I trust this source, and I want to quickly identify if they are observed in my tenants. In that way, I don't have to wait until I have the time to read a new article or something like that. It's totally speeding up the integration of these cases. And here you have some of the results. So I can say these are real ones. So as I said at the beginning, I'm really excited to go further because I see that is something that can improve a lot the response to my current service. So that's all about the theory and the practice, and I want to show you a small introduction about how I'm doing this integration of IOC matching in MISP. So basically, as I said, when I have a match between a TI feed and my tenants, I'm registering them in MISP or OpenCTI or other systems that you have for information sharing. And for that, I'm using 3 products for this registration, which is an app registration. It not has any cost, so you can configure the app registration. Then the app registration is connecting via Microsoft Graph API to execute KQL queries. I will show you how I'm doing that. And all is inside of the Logic app, which is doing the different actions. So how it works, the app registration has a role that is advanced hunting. And with this advanced hunting, automatically I can execute KQL queries. How? I'm saving 3 values that are tenant ID, app ID, and secret in my key vault, or as you can use a client certificate. And then in the Logic app, I'm calling these 3 values, tenant ID, app ID, and secret. And with this value, it backs me a token. And with the token, I can start to trigger HTTP calls to Microsoft Graph API. And in that way, I can execute all my KQL queries. This is how it looks. As I say, the 3 values, I have the token, perfect. I can start to play. I start to execute my KQL queries. And once I have the results as this one that you see in the screen, that is more focused on a specific malware, automatically for each case, I have a second action, which is triggering another HTTP call, but in this case to MISP, and I'm adding an entry for every case that I'm observing. As easy as that. It's not has any secret. I love Logic apps because as for people as me that I'm not really good programming, it helped me a lot. It's really, really, really good. And this is the result. Basically here you can add all the tags that you want, and inside you have the different attributes, no? We talk about malicious files. Here you have the corresponding file hashes and other information. So that's it. And in that way, I can also gather all the information and have all the retention that I want in my information sharing platform I don't have to rely on retention of another type of service. It's also nice, this part. So that's it. If you have some questions, I'm really happy to answer.
Oh, stuff. And yes, I do have a question. Because
yes.
Unless you are living under a stone, in the last couple of days, those people that use Claude, Copilot, etc. We have this whole discussion about the use of tokens. Pricing is going to change. So my question is, if you are willing to share a little bit more, I mean, if you are using your coworker agent or Claude to basically look up IOCs, have you done anything in terms of optimization in not spending too much token credits? Because for everything that you send up, you kind of pay for credits, and also for everything that you get as a message back. And I can imagine that depending on the data source, you are having Claude do the work for you. If that has like 50,000 entries, you probably spend a lot of tokens.
Yeah, it's a good one. I think it's one of the big challenges, how to arrive to execute our AI agents as much as we want without spending all the credits. So basically what I'm doing is I use AI agents to build what I want. Once I have what I want, I'm not using anymore. What I mean, all these flows that I have shared during the presentation are built on my GitLab. So I use Claude to say, create me a pipeline that is doing these instructions, running every hour to get this and reach this. But then Claude is not used anymore. Just when I want to add a new enrichment, a new feature.
Okay. Then I got that wrong. I understood that basically Claude is also doing, on the individual IOCs
my flow was not correctly. I should have had in the middle that I have these pipelines. No, but yeah, that's a bit the idea. But yeah, I understand you, because we are having this challenge with other employees that are using Claude more often, daily, and it's complicated to optimize and arrive to execute what they want.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, very interesting approach, and fully agree. Although it's a few years back, but when I entered the security space, I was overwhelmed by the hundreds of feeds, and at that time, I used to work with MindMeld. I think that product is depreciated meanwhile, and there they had this aggregation feature, and it also became clear to me that how many TI feeds are basically, just a copy of another one of the other feed. And that's also why I ended up creating my little script recently to get rid of my 5.5 million IOCs that I have collected over time in my Sentinel instance. Luckily, only my lab environment, but yeah.
No, it's the magic of this AI stuff, that at the end you can have exactly what is focused on what you need from your customers or your environment. Is what I really love.
Yeah. As you spoke about your way of evaluating, are you also taking into account, terminologies that we know, like a TP level or confidence level? Is that also something that you include there?
Yes. Basically, one of the challenges that I have seen is that sometimes if an account is compromised, the account that is at the end legitimate because could come from a university, I cannot share if the sender is about university, from university, because it will have the email address, it will have the sender display name, it could contain the sender IP that is a legitimate one. So inside of all my flows, I have different controls also that in case that an account is compromised, I'm able to not register this case in MISP. because so this kind of indicators, I'm sharing some indicators with another foundation called Jean, and it's important that we not share something that is sensitive or confidential. So it's one of the challenges also that evaluate all the scenarios, that could break this TLP, amber or red that we have, as you have seen in the slides.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. By the way, I don't know if you're familiar with that, talking about news from the community. I recently saw, maybe I find the link, a post floating around about a new MISP to Sentinel integration, where someone did some work on that. Yeah.
I have to admit that I'm not really confident with that. I tell you why. Basically, because with my HTTP codes, I can decide what I integrate or not, or what I collect or not. With this integration, I'm more restricted to this connector at the end.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Any other questions? Those online, don't be shy or post it in the chat.
In the meantime, if you use the other integration, you can also do the filtering on your MISP side, so you don't have to clean your MISP instance, and that way you don't only send the curated data to the Sentinel, but that's a bit of how you manage it.
Yeah.
Good. As always, a very cool and interesting work. I loved that one so much, Sergio. I have to mention it. So for those who don't know, Sergio also worked on another project recently where he worked, and I think I even mentioned it in the news, where you worked on the internet message ID and how you kind of, let's call it, decompiled the message ID for email messages to find also indicators. Yeah. So that's also a super interesting case. Yeah. Cool.
Thanks a lot to you for this new opportunity.
Yeah. Okay. Then thank you, and please stay online if you can. Then we move over to our section regarding what have you done. And for that, I'm actually just going to share my live browser. So what is this about? I've been recently, like many others, eventually been looking more closely into the whole topic of agents. Besides detecting stuff that happens in the agent, like in Entra, where we want to monitor conditional access policies and our authentication policies. So, keep an eye on whether certain tenant-wide settings are not being unintentionally changed. As we dive into the world of agents, we also have a lot of settings in the admin portal for tenant-wide settings. For agents, we have a lot of settings also related to Copilot. So as I like to look under the hood and apply KQL for that, I've actually started to look into, how can I actually detect any changes that are happening to these settings. So, we have user access settings, and depending on where you are and where your company is in the adoption of agents, you might have a good reason to either allow, any user access or only specific groups. The same applies for sharing, type settings, who do you want to allow to share or not to share their agents. And last but not least, the type of agents that you allow to be in your company, in your company store. So whether you only want to have Microsoft agents or only your own ones, or whether you also accept third-party agents. So as a result of that, I basically created a bunch of queries. Quickly gonna bring them up. I just noticed they are in the wrong browser, so give me a second. You'll find them either through KQL search from Google or by directly So allowed agent types, and of course, as always, a little bit of a description. And what I've done here is basically also do the translation, because as you probably know by now, sometimes the values in the events, might not be exactly as you read them in the portal. As you can see here, allow first party, third party, LOB, line of business. So this basically translates to, line of business, quite obvious, your own created agents. First party is Microsoft, and these are external ones. So I thought I'd do people a favor and translate that as well. So here's the first query to look at whether anyone did make changes to the allowed agent types, and the result would then be something like this, as you can see here, where I just, prior to the session, made some changes. The other one I've prepared is the sharing options. Very similar one here. Also, I embedded a little bit of a translation to, what has been changed, so it's easier to read. Exactly. Query with enriched, added, and removed. So if someone made changes from all users to only selected users, that we also get the details of, which users were actually now added and removed. And last but not least, the query around the user access. Very similar query. Exactly. So this was an easy one because it followed kind of the same logic. As you can see, I'll continue to look into all sorts of agent settings and changes. Maybe one I can also briefly share, and that is, where are we? Power Platform. Because if you're dealing with Copilot Studio, behind the scenes, you also end up looking into Power Platform. So that's related to all the settings that you might find in here. I'm dissecting them, but as soon as you start to make changes to those settings here, you basically end up in the Power Platform. And for that, by the way, you will need to either enable the Power Platform admin activity logs. There's a Sentinel data collector for that. Or if you're lucky, you also find them in the Cloud App events. So that's basically it from my side for this month. And then I hand it over to Gianni.
Thank you. So basically, one of the things I'm working on is building a dashboard to understand a bit of the flow of data. In the past KQL Cafés, I also showed some things. And this month, I found something new. So basically, in my old current dashboard, I basically had a feature to see the ingest in data lake. What I basically did is I did a union search on all my data and a regular search on all my data to see what was in data lake and ingested in Central, which worked okay-ish, but not completely. So basically I had a trigger over here where I had the option to select several modes. The deep mode was the table scan, and then I would scan all data to see which data landed in the data lake. And this works okay, but now every time, as you can see, when I refresh the dashboard, it becomes a bit slow. It has to query all the data. If you query your data lake data more than 900 times, you basically lose the discount of ingesting it into data lake. So this option worked, and it was quite fun to build, but yeah, it costs money. So basically, the other day I found out that if we nowadays look at the usage table, we can see that in the usage table, the Microsoft team also added a plan. So basically, if it loads, You can see we have the plan. So the tier is analytics tier. Over here we also have some auxiliary. So basically for my own tenant, I ingest all my Microsoft Graph activity logs. I send it to the data lake so that to reduce ingest basically, and also to play around, because in my tenant it's not real interesting, because every hour it's still almost what is the megabyte? And as you can imagine, if you have tens of thousands of users, Microsoft Graph activity logs can be it can be a large source. So then you want to have it in your data lake. So basically, by using the plan, I switched my dashboard to the new version. I removed the button, the pill over here. I also made for now a small description for myself. Hey, instead of using the search and the union with source stubs, I do use the plan, and now it's also becoming a lot faster to refresh the data. That's basically my little project. So basically, in the end, what I'm doing here is collecting all the ingested data, see where it lands. I also do a bit of calculation based on the benefits, because as you have E5, A5 licenses or the Defender for Cloud P2 server licenses, then you get some free ingest with them. It's nice to calculate them. So we have a coverage. So basically, what do you ingest and how much data do you ingest? So in my tenant, this doesn't do anything. Value per table is also quite interesting, because now I can see, hey, this table, in my case, I ingested the most in the threat intel indicators. And basically, we can see how many alerts and how many detections we had and how many times it got queried and by how many users. That's nice to do. Also a bit of tier recommendation, because you can basically, based on the average ingest into your Sentinel workspace, you can recommend a certain discount tier. The main problem with this, or the main challenge, is if you in the weekends you ingest less data. So it's not that if you're every day above a certain amount, then in the weekend it can be way under, and then still the tier doesn't make sense. Also, another cool thing which I built here is the pricing table. So I can show it in the code a bit. So what I did, if we go to here, edit, wrong one. Here's the description. So we don't need that. We need this. So basically what I'm doing is I do a API call to the Sentinel API, to the Microsoft APIs. This one is not behind a authentication, so they're publicly available. So basically, based on the currency and based on the region you set, we can collect the pricing. So that's quite nice.
Yeah, so you don't have to enter it manually, but you're basically fetching a live current pricing as you would see it on the Azure pricing website. Yeah.
And even what I did is basically when I select this workspace, it will automatically populate the region, and because it's populating the region, it's also populating the price. So it's becoming a nice project.
Oh.
And also in the retention estimate side, I basically, based on the past ingest, if I have the logs, then I can also say, hey, this is the amount of retention we expect. It's still a bit of work in progress. I have some features which I still want to add, but for now it's getting places. And now, especially with the usage table change, adding the plan details, it's making it faster, and I now don't have to create a data lake.
Cool. Yeah, definitely very useful for people planning to move to data lake, or actually already being in the data lake and looking for more opportunities, in case for cost savings versus, what you keep in hot storage. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. Good. Then next month we have an interesting guest as well.
Diana Damanova.
Yeah. So in case, I think we spoke briefly about it last month, about some new KQL functions, but Diana also introduced the concept of incident response KQL. So basically a whole bunch of, let's call it functions, that can make, especially if you're an incident responder, can make your life easier and I would say reduce a few lines of KQL code here and there. Not sure if she will talk actually about that specifically, but definitely stay tuned and mark your agenda for June 30, same time, same location. Yeah. So with that, I think we're at the end of our content for today. Thank you everyone for joining online. And for those who watch the video at a later point of time, thank you for being part of this community as well.
Thank you all, and have a nice evening.
Bye.
Bye.